I used to believe that humiliation had limits, that even cruelty had boundaries. I was wrong, because on the night of my 28th birthday, standing under gold streamers and artificial fairy lights in my father's backyard, holding a glass of champagne I didn't even want, I learned something devastating. My father had never loved me, and he wasn't afraid to make sure everyone knew it. The music was too loud. The laughter was too sharp. The air smelled like grilled steak and expensive wine. My stepmother, Clarissa, had organized the party. Of course she had. She loved events that required an audience. She said it was a celebration of family. What she meant was spectacle. I should have known something was wrong when she insisted on inviting my father's business partners and their wives and distant relatives I hadn't seen in 10 years. No one throws a 28th birthday party like a corporate gala unless they're trying to prove something or humiliate someone. I remember adjusting the navy blue dress I bought myself because no one else ever did. I remember my hands shaking when my father tapped his spoon against his glass. Clink, 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 the universal sound of attention. The yard quieted. Speech, someone called. My father smiled. He always looked charming before he destroyed something. If I may, he began, clearing his throat. Tonight isn't just about Luna turning 28. My stomach tightened. It's about growth, he continued. It's about accepting reality. A few guests chuckled politely. I felt the ground shift under my heels. I'll be honest, he said, swirling his wine. When Luna was born, it wasn't planned. Soft laughter. My ears started ringing. She was a surprise, he added. Clarissa leaned into her friend, whispering something that made them both smirk, and not the good kind. The laughter grew, louder this time. I stopped breathing. My father took a sip of wine, enjoying himself. There are moments in a man's life when he has to face his mistakes, he continued casually. And while I've tried to do my duty, sometimes you look at something and realize it simply wasn't meant to be. The word mistake hovered unspoken, but everyone heard it. Someone near the buffet coughed awkwardly. I felt heat crawl up my neck. I had spent my entire childhood trying to earn love from a man who had just reduced my existence to an accounting error. And the worst part, he wasn't drunk. He wasn't emotional. He was calculated. I saw it then, the satisfaction in his eyes. He wanted to shrink me. He wanted to remind everyone who had paid for the wine. I suppose, he added lightly, we all survive our unexpected burdens. That did it. The yard erupted in nervous laughter. And something inside me, something that had been bending for 28 years, finally snapped. Because here was the truth. I had been carrying his secret since I was 19. And until that moment, I had protected him. Protected his reputation, his business, his second marriage. Protected the illusion. But humiliation has a breaking point. And mine arrived with a champagne flute in my hand and 200 witnesses. I slowly set my glass down. The ringing in my ears faded. My heart stopped racing, because calm is dangerous. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of him. I stepped forward. Is that what I am? I asked, my voice steady. The yard went silent. My father blinked, slightly amused. Luna, sweetheart, it's a joke. No, I said, it's not. I looked around at the guests, investors, relatives, strangers. You want honesty tonight. I continued, let's have honesty. Clarissa's smile faded. My father's jaw tightened. I had imagined this moment for years, but I never thought it would happen at my own birthday party. Since we're talking about mistakes, I said softly, should we talk about the offshore accounts? The silence turned suffocating. My father's face changed instantly. A flicker of fear. Tiny, but real. What are you talking about? He said sharply. I held his gaze. I'm talking about the money you moved through shell companies 5 years ago. A murmur rippled through the crowd. His business partner straightened. Clarissa's wine glass trembled. I'm talking about the properties registered under someone else's name. I paused. Should I say hers? I let my eyes drift, deliberately, toward Clarissa. Gasps. Now he wasn't smiling. Luna, he warned quietly, but he'd already lost control. You said I was a burden, I continued, louder now. A mistake. I felt strangely powerful. But I was also your bookkeeper, remember? When Mom died. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. He had made me manage financial records when I was barely 20. Said it would teach responsibility. It had, just not the way he intended. I saw everything, I said. Every transfer, every hidden account, every falsified expense. His business partner stared at him. Clarissa went pale. And for 9 years, I continued, my voice breaking just slightly, I kept quiet, because I thought protecting you meant maybe one day you'd love me. The silence hurt. But tonight, I said, lifting my chin, you made it clear. My father stepped toward me, his voice low and furious. Stop this. No, I said, and for the first time in my life I meant it. I was never the mistake, I whispered. I was the witness. Someone dropped a fork. The sound echoed. I reached into my purse and pulled out the flash drive I had carried for years. Insurance. Proof. Freedom. You humiliated me, I said calmly. So I decided to stop protecting you. I held the drive up for everyone to see. The fairy lights flickered in the wind. This, I said, contains every transaction you thought no one would notice. His face drained of color. You wouldn't, he breathed. I tilted my head. You already decided I was a mistake. I slipped the drive into my clutch again. I guess we'll find out. And then I walked away from my own birthday party. Not running, not crying, just walking. Behind me, chaos exploded. Voices, accusations, Clarissa yelling, his partner demanding answers. For the first time in 28 years, I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't apologizing. I wasn't begging for scraps of love. I was done. But what I didn't know that night was that my father had one more move left, and he wasn't going down quietly. I should have known he wouldn't let me walk away peacefully. Men like my father didn't lose control. They reclaimed it. The morning after the party, my phone started ringing at 6:12 a.m. Unknown number. I didn't answer. It rang again and again. By 7 a.m., I had 12 missed calls, 3 voicemails, and 1 text message. From him. You've made a serious mistake. Call me. Now. The irony almost made me laugh. I didn't call. Instead, I got up, made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table staring at the flash drive. 9 years. 9 years I had carried that thing like a secret organ inside my body. It wasn't revenge. It was survival. But now survival had turned into war. At 8:03 a.m., my doorbell rang. I froze. No one ever came over unannounced. Not since I'd learned to keep my life quiet. The doorbell rang again. Longer. Aggressive. I walked to the door slowly and checked the camera on my phone. 2 men in suits. Not police. Not friends. Lawyers. Of course. I opened the door, just enough to keep the chain locked. Yes. Miss Luna, the taller one asked politely. Yes. We represent your father. I leaned against the doorframe. I assumed as much. He handed me an envelope. You are advised to refrain from making defamatory statements regarding your father's business operations. I didn't take it. Is that a threat? It's a formal notice. His eyes were cold, professional, prepared. They had moved fast, too fast, which meant one thing. He had been preparing for this possibility long before my birthday. He always had contingency plans. I accepted the envelope. Tell him something for me, I said calmly. The shorter lawyer adjusted his glasses. We cannot relay personal messages. I smiled. You just did. And I closed the door. The letter accused me of attempted extortion. Extortion. He was already rewriting the story. According to the document, I had fabricated allegations and was attempting to damage his reputation for financial gain. Financial gain. The man who called me a burden was now painting me as a greedy daughter. I felt the old instinct rising, the urge to defend myself, to explain, to prove I wasn't what he said I was. But I stopped, because I finally understood something. People like my father didn't attack your weakness. They manufactured it. And if I reacted emotionally, I'd be playing the role he wrote for me. By noon, the smear campaign began. My cousin texted first. "What did you do? Uncle says you're trying to blackmail him." Then my aunt. "Family matters should stay private." Then Clarissa. Her message was simple. "You have no idea what you've started." She was wrong. I knew exactly what I'd started. I had started refusing to be small. By late afternoon, the retaliation escalated. My company email stopped working. Then my access to shared financial accounts was revoked. My father owned 60% of the family construction firm. Technically, he had authority, but the timing wasn't coincidence. He was isolating me, cutting off resources, punishment disguised as procedure. I drove to the office anyway. When I arrived, my keycard didn't work. The receptionist wouldn't look at me. "HR said you're on leave," she whispered. "Leave?" I asked. "Administrative review." I almost laughed. Administrative review? For what? Being born? I called the only person in that building who had ever treated me like a human being. Daniel, our senior project manager. He picked up on the second ring. "Luna, I was going to call you." "Let me guess," I said. "I'm unstable." He hesitated. "They're saying you've been acting erratic, that you threatened your father." Of course they were. Narrative control. Classic move. "Do you believe that?" I asked quietly. There was a long pause. "No," he said finally, "but they're pushing hard." I closed my eyes. I could handle legal threats. I could handle public humiliation. But character assassination? That was personal. Because my entire life, I had tried to be the reasonable one, the calm one, the capable one. And now he was painting me as hysterical, just like he used to when I was 13 and cried after he canceled my recital to attend a golf meeting. "You're too sensitive, Luna. You're dramatic. You exaggerate." He had been rehearsing this storyline for years. That night I didn't sleep, not because I was afraid, but because clarity hurts. I finally saw the pattern. My father had always needed me small, because if I stayed insecure, I stayed controllable. And the moment I stepped into power, he attacked, not as a father, as a strategist. At 2:17 a.m., my phone buzzed again. This time it was Daniel. "You need to see this." He sent a link. It was a press release draft from my father's PR team. Headline: "Local businessman victim of family extortion attempt." My name wasn't mentioned directly, but the implications were clear. A disgruntled relative. False financial allegations. Mental health concerns. My stomach dropped. Mental health concerns. That was the kill shot. If he could frame me as unstable, everything I said would become questionable. I stared at the ceiling, and something unexpected happened. I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I didn't break. I felt angry. Not explosive anger. Focused anger. Because he had just crossed a line. He wasn't defending himself. He was trying to erase me. And that's when I stopped thinking like a daughter and started thinking like a witness. The next morning I made 3 calls. First, a forensic accountant I'd met at a finance seminar 2 years ago. Her name was Evelyn Hart. Brilliant, ruthless, ethical. She picked up immediately. "Luna, it's been a while. I have something you need to see." Silence. Then, "How big?" "Federal big." Another pause. "Send it." Second call, a journalist. Not a blogger. Not gossip media. An investigative reporter known for dismantling corporate corruption. Marcus Hale. He had once taken down a real estate conglomerate twice our size. He didn't answer, but he texted back within minutes. "Proof." I looked at the flash drive on my table. Yes, I typed. 1 word. He responded. "Then we talk." Third call. The hardest one. My therapist. Because strength isn't pretending you're fine. It's knowing when you need backup. I think he's going to destroy my reputation, I told her. She was quiet for a moment. Or, she said gently, he's afraid you'll destroy his. I hadn't considered that. Not fully. Fear makes people vicious. And my father was terrified. By evening, the situation escalated again. A courier delivered official documents. I had been formally suspended from the company board, pending internal misconduct investigation. Internal misconduct. No explanation. No evidence. Just removal. He was trying to cut my credibility before I could act. But here's what he didn't know. I had already duplicated the flash drive. Twice. One copy in a safety deposit box. One copy in Marcus Hale's encrypted cloud folder. Insurance. Because if he wanted war, I wouldn't fight emotionally. I'd fight strategically. 2 days later, the first article dropped. Not from Marcus. From a smaller business outlet. Headline: Daughter accuses father of financial misconduct amid personal dispute. It was carefully worded, neutral tone, but the implication was there. Personal dispute. Family drama. I knew where it came from. My father's PR machine was soft-launching the narrative, testing public reaction, controlling the tempo, but they had miscalculated one thing. They assumed I would respond defensively. I didn't. Instead, I waited. Because truth doesn't need to shout. It needs timing. The real blow came 3 nights later. I returned home from meeting Evelyn to find my apartment door slightly open. My blood went cold. I never left it unlocked. Never. I pushed it open slowly. Nothing looked overturned. Nothing looked stolen. But something was wrong. The air felt disturbed. On my kitchen table sat an envelope. No stamp. No address. Inside was a single photograph. Me, at 16, crying at my mother's funeral. On the back, written in my father's handwriting, "Some mistakes are better buried." My hand started shaking. This wasn't legal. This wasn't business. This was psychological warfare. He wanted to remind me that he could reach into my past, that he could reopen wounds, that he still had power. For a brief moment, I felt that old fear, the little girl fear, the don't make him angry fear. But then something shifted, because intimidation only works if the target retreats. And I was done retreating. I took a picture of the envelope, of the handwriting, of the intrusion, and I sent it to Marcus. His reply came quickly. He just made this criminal. Good. Let it be criminal. Let it be messy. Let it be public. The retaliation didn't stop, but neither did I. Every move he made confirmed what I already knew. He wasn't protecting his name. He was protecting his secrets. And secrets panic when exposed. By the end of the week, rumors were circulating through the business community. Investors were whispering. Board members were nervous. And for the first time in my life, my father wasn't smiling at public events. He looked tense, sharp, cornered, because he understood something now. I wasn't bluffing, and I wasn't begging. I was building case. And while he had spent years trying to convince me I was weak, he had forgotten something important. He had trained me himself. In finance, in contracts, in documentation. He taught me how to read balance sheets, how to follow money trails, how to spot inconsistencies. He created the witness, and now the witness was done protecting him. But retaliation always has a breaking point, and his came sooner than he expected, because 3 days later, Marcus Hale called me and said 5 words that changed everything. "We're ready to publish." When Marcus said, "We're ready to publish," I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calm, the kind of calm that comes right before a storm makes landfall. "Are you sure?" I asked him. "I don't move without certainty," he replied. "We verified offshore transfers, shell registrations, cross-referenced tax inconsistencies. If this goes live, it won't be rumor." I closed my eyes. 9 years of silence. 9 years of protecting a man who called me a mistake in front of 200 people. Then publish it, I said. And just like that, there was no going back. The article dropped at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. Marcus didn't dramatize it. He didn't exaggerate. He dismantled my father with facts. Local construction executive linked to undisclosed offshore assets and financial irregularities. There was no mention of a family dispute. No emotional framing. Just documented transactions. Dates. Amounts. Shell entities. Property transfers connected to Clarissa. And one devastating line. The documentation was provided by a former internal financial officer within the company. Former. I had officially crossed into exile. By 6:12 a.m., my phone exploded. Messages from colleagues. Unknown numbers. Journalists. Investors. Daniel called first. Luna! The board just called an emergency session. I leaned against my kitchen counter. Of course they did. Half of them are panicking. The other half are denying everything. And him? I asked. There was a pause. He hasn't come into the office. That was the first crack. My father never missed a morning meeting. Control was his oxygen. And right now, someone had tightened the mask. By 9 a.m., the second wave hit. National business outlets picked it up. The phrase federal investigation started appearing. Because once financial irregularities crossed international lines, it wasn't just a scandal. It was jurisdiction. At 10:17 a.m., I received a call I had half expected. Clarissa. I let it ring twice before answering. What do you want? She snapped. Her voice was different. No velvet. No superiority. Just fear. I want the truth, I said evenly. You've destroyed everything, she hissed. Do you have any idea what you've done? Yes. You think this makes you righteous? You think exposing him makes you strong? No, I said quietly, but staying silent made me weak. She inhaled sharply. You don't understand how this works, she continued. When he falls, everyone falls. Not everyone. Did you know? I asked. Silence. That the properties were under your name? Her breath caught. They were investments. Were they declared? Another silence. That was answer enough. You were part of it, I said. You think you're innocent, she shot back. You handled accounts. I documented them. I corrected. There's a difference. She lowered her voice. They're going to come after you too. Let them, I said. Because here's what she didn't understand. I wasn't afraid of investigation. I was afraid of silence. And I was done being afraid. By noon, the board announced a temporary suspension of my father pending review. Suspension. A polite corporate word for collapse. He still hadn't contacted me. Not directly. But he didn't need to. Because at 2:43 p.m., I received a text from an unknown number. You could have handled this privately. I stared at it. Then another message. You've embarrassed the family. Family. That word again. I typed back. You embarrassed yourself. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then nothing. For the first time in my life, he didn't have a prepared speech. The real unraveling began 48 hours later. Federal agents arrived at the company headquarters. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just methodical. Computers were seized. Documents collected. Staff interviewed. Daniel texted me. It's real. This is real. Yes, it was real. Because truth, once released, doesn't crawl back into the dark. It spreads, but exposure isn't clean. It doesn't feel like justice at first. It feels like grief. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at old photos. Me at 7 years old, holding his hand at a school fair. Me at 12, standing beside him at a company event, smiling too hard. Me at 16, at my mother's funeral. And suddenly the anger cracked. Because beneath all the strategy, there was still a daughter who had once believed that if she tried harder, worked longer, proved herself smarter, she might finally be enough. And the hardest truth wasn't about offshore accounts. It was this. He had never planned to love me. Not fully, not safely, because loving someone means giving them power. And my father only loved what he controlled. 3 days after the article, he finally came to see me. Not at my office. Not at a public place. At my apartment. I almost didn't open the door. But I did. He looked older. Not physically. Structurally. Like something inside him had shifted. "You look pleased," he said. "I'm not," I replied. He stepped inside without invitation. Still claiming territory. "You think this ends well for you?" he asked. "I think it ends honestly." He scoffed. "You've always been dramatic." There it was again. The rewriting. "You called me a mistake," I said. He waved it off. "It was a joke." "No," I said quietly. "It wasn't." Silence stretched between us. For a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not rage. Not arrogance. Fear. "You don't understand the pressure I was under," he said finally. "Pressure doesn't make you cruel," I answered. "It reveals you." His jaw tightened. "You think I did this for pleasure? The transfers? The accounts?" "I think you did it because you believed you wouldn't get caught." His hand slammed against my kitchen table. "You ungrateful." "Don't," I said sharply. He stopped, because for the first time my voice didn't shake. "You built your empire on manipulation," I continued. "You manipulated investors, the board, Clarissa." "And you," he snapped. "Yes," I said. And that was the shift. I didn't deny it. I didn't defend. "Yes," I repeated. "You manipulated me, but I let you." He stared at me, confused, because power loses force when its target accepts the truth. "You were easier to control when you wanted my approval," he said quietly. There it was, the confession hidden inside an insult. "I don't want it any more," I said, and something in him broke. Not loudly, but visibly. "You've destroyed the only thing that mattered," he said. "No," I replied. "You did. I just stopped protecting it." He walked to the door, paused. "You think this makes you strong?" "No," I said again. "It makes me free." He left without another word, and as the door closed behind him, I realized something profound. He didn't look angry. He looked small, but the final unraveling came from somewhere unexpected. "Clarissa." A week after the investigation began, she requested to meet. Public place. Neutral ground. She arrived without makeup, without elegance, without the practiced composure she wore like armor. "They're freezing my accounts," she said immediately. I didn't respond. "They're reviewing property transfers. If they decide I was complicit." "Were you?" I asked. She looked down. "I didn't ask questions." "That's not innocence." She swallowed. "You think he loved you?" she asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. "I don't know," I said honestly. She let out a hollow laugh. "He doesn't love people. He collects them." The words echoed. "Collects them. Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because he's preparing to shift blame." My stomach dropped. "On who?" "On you." "Of course. If he can prove you accessed financial systems." "I did," I said. She nodded slowly. "He'll argue you acted independently. A clean cut. Sacrifice the daughter. Protect the empire." I leaned back in my chair. "And you?" I asked. She hesitated. Then she did something I never expected. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents, email chains, authorization forms, signed directives, his signature, everywhere. "He never thought I'd keep copies," she whispered. "Why did you?" She met my eyes. "Because one day I knew he'd turn on me too." And in that moment, I understood something powerful. Tyrants don't just create enemies. They create survivors. When the second expose dropped, it wasn't mine. It was hers. Clarissa testified, provided documentation, confirmed intentional concealment of assets. The narrative shifted instantly. This wasn't a disgruntled daughter. This was systemic deception. And once that door opened, others followed. former employees, silent partners, an accountant who had resigned abruptly 3 years ago. Patterns emerged. Not emotional, financial, structured, intentional. The day federal charges were announced, I didn't celebrate. I didn't cry. I sat quietly in my apartment and let the silence settle. He wasn't arrested dramatically. No handcuffs on live television, just a formal summons. Court date pending. Assets frozen. Reputation fractured. And suddenly, I wasn't the mistake anymore. I was the daughter who told the truth. But justice isn't the same as healing. And even as his empire collapsed, I still had to rebuild myself. Because strength isn't exposing someone, it's surviving the aftermath. And as I stood at my window that night, watching the city lights flicker against the dark sky, I understood something that changed me forever. He had called me a mistake, but mistakes don't dismantle corruption. Mistakes don't withstand intimidation. Mistakes don't choose integrity over fear. I wasn't the accident. I was the reckoning. The courtroom didn't feel dramatic. It felt sterile. Cold wood benches, neutral walls, fluorescent lighting that flattened everyone into something pale and ordinary. There were no cinematic soundtracks, no slow-motion justice, just paperwork and consequences. I sat 3 rows behind the prosecution table, hands folded in my lap, breathing carefully. Reporters filled the back benches, investors, former employees, curious strangers, and him. My father sat beside his attorney, posture straight, suit immaculate, expression composed. If you didn't know what he had done, you might have mistaken him for a man wrongfully accused. He didn't look at me when he entered. That hurt more than anger would have. The charges were read calmly. Financial fraud, intentional concealment of offshore assets, tax evasion, corporate misrepresentation. Each word sounded clinical, but I knew the human cost behind them. The judge set preliminary terms. Asset freezes extended. Travel restrictions enforced. My father's attorney argued for leniency. Community leader. Respected businessman. Family man. Family man. The phrase almost made me laugh out loud. When court adjourned for the day, the hallway exploded with questions from journalists. I stayed back. I didn't want cameras. I wanted clarity. But clarity doesn't arrive when you demand it. It arrives when something breaks. And something broke 2 days later. It started with a box. A small, worn cardboard box delivered to my apartment with no return address. Inside were my mother's things. Her jewelry. Her old address book. A silk scarf I remembered from childhood. And at the bottom, a sealed envelope. My name written in her handwriting. My knees gave out before I even opened it, because I knew something instinctively. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. Someone had kept this hidden, and someone had decided to release it now. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, dated 3 months before she died. Luna, if you are reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to tell you everything myself. There are truths about your father that I tried to protect you from. Not because I wanted to lie, but because I believed you deserved a childhood untouched by adult failures. But you must know this. You were never a mistake. I stopped breathing. Tears blurred the ink. Your father did not resent you because you were unplanned. He resented you because you were proof. Proof. Proof of what? I kept reading. The company he built, the foundation everyone praises, was not started with honest money. I discovered it 5 years after you were born. Funds moved quietly. Contracts manipulated. I confronted him. My heart pounded. He begged me not to expose him. He said it would ruin us. Ruin you. I believed him. My hands were ice. But when I told him I intended to report it anyway, that's when everything changed. The words felt heavier now. We argued constantly. He began sleeping elsewhere. And when I refused to sign certain documents, he made it clear that if I destroyed his reputation, he would destroy mine. Destroy mine. Luna, if something ever happens to me, You must understand. Silence protects the wrong person. The letter ended with one final line. You are not his mistake. You are my courage. I sobbed. Not softly, not controlled. Years of confusion collapsed into understanding. He hadn't resented me for existing. He resented me for resembling her, for inheriting her integrity, for threatening the illusion he built. The autopsy report had ruled my mother's death a sudden cardiac event. Stress-related. I had believed it, until that letter. Now, doubt crawled into my bloodstream. Had it been stress? Or had it been something more subtle? Pressure, manipulation, isolation. You don't have to poison someone to destroy them. Sometimes you just corner them. I took the letter to Marcus immediately. He read it twice, then looked at me carefully. If this is authentic, and it appears to be, it changes motive. Motive for what? I asked. For why he's always needed to control the narrative. The prosecution added the letter to their evidence file, not as a murder accusation. There was no proof of that, but as contextual pattern, a history of coercion, a history of concealment, a history of intimidation. And suddenly, my father's public persona began to crack. Court resumed the following week. This time, Clarissa testified. I watched from the gallery as she described the offshore accounts, the shell companies, the pressure to sign documents, the threats. He said if I questioned him, she admitted quietly, I would lose everything. And did you believe him? The prosecutor asked. Yes. Her voice broke, and for the first time I saw her not as an enemy, but as another person who had once mistaken control for love. Then it was my turn. When I took the stand, I felt strangely steady. The oath felt heavier than I expected. Tell the truth. The whole truth. Nothing but the truth. I had been telling fragments for years. Now I would tell all of it. I described the birthday party. His words. The humiliation. The history of financial inconsistencies I had documented. The intimidation at my apartment. The photograph. The letter. When the defense attorney cross-examined me, he tried to paint me as emotional. You were hurt, he said. Angry. Yes, I replied calmly. And that anger influenced your actions. No, I said. Integrity did. He attempted another angle. You benefited from the company's success, did you not? I benefited from working hard, I said. Not from fraud. He circled. He probed. But the truth doesn't tremble when it's consistent. And I had lived with it too long to falter now. Then came the moment I hadn't prepared for. My father requested to speak. Not through his lawyer. Personally. The courtroom went silent. He stood slowly. Still dignified. Still composed. For years, he began, I built something from nothing. He paced carefully. Sacrificed sleep. Relationships. Peace. He glanced at me briefly. Sometimes ambition requires difficult decisions. Difficult decisions. That's what he called it. Everything I did was to secure a future for my family. My chest tightened. Family again. But somewhere along the way, he continued, my daughter decided that imperfection equaled evil. He faced me fully now. You were always idealistic, Luna. The old tactic, belittle the moral stance. You see the world in black and white. I held his gaze. No, I said softly. I just refuse to live in gray when it hides harm. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. His composure flickered, just for a second, and that's when I saw it clearly. He wasn't defending himself. He was defending his identity. Because if he admitted wrongdoing, he wasn't powerful. He was ordinary, flawed, human, and my father would rather be feared than flawed. The verdict didn't come that day, or the next. Legal systems move slower than emotional ones, but the outcome became inevitable. Financial records don't lie when cross-examined. Paper trails don't rewrite themselves. And once enough people speak, silence collapses. When sentencing day arrived, I expected to feel something dramatic. Closure, relief, triumph. Instead, I felt still. The judge outlined the findings carefully. intentional misconduct, willful concealment, abuse of fiduciary responsibility, penalties imposed, assets forfeited, reputation dismantled, not prison, but disqualification, public disgrace, financial loss, permanent. As my father stood there absorbing it, he looked smaller than I had ever seen him, not because he was convicted, but because the illusion was gone. He was no longer untouchable. He was accountable. After the hearing, he approached me one last time. No cameras nearby. No lawyers. Just us. "You think this makes you better than me?" he asked quietly. "No," I said. "It makes me different." He studied my face. "You could have protected us." "I tried," I said. "For 9 years." Silence. Then something unexpected. "I never meant for your mother to leave," he murmured. The word stunned me. "Leave?" I asked. "She threatened everything I built." There it was again. Everything he built. Not everything we had. Not everything we were. Just his empire. "And you chose it," I said. He didn't deny it. That was the closest thing to honesty I would ever receive from him. "I hope it was worth it," I added. He didn't answer, because deep down, he knew it wasn't. That night, I returned home and reread my mother's letter. The final line echoed differently now. "You are my courage." For years, I thought strength meant surviving humiliation, enduring criticism, earning approval. But strength wasn't endurance. It was refusal. Refusal to protect harm. Refusal to shrink. Refusal to inherit silence. My father had called me a mistake. But mistakes don't testify. Mistakes don't dismantle empires. Mistakes don't choose truth when it costs them everything. He had tried to bury the truth. He buried it with intimidation, with shame, with manipulation. But buried things don't disappear. They wait, and when they surface, they don't whisper. They roar. I stood at my window that night, city lights stretching endlessly beyond the glass. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like someone's daughter, or someone's burden, or someone's proof. I felt like myself, and that was stronger than anything he ever built. When the noise finally died down, silence felt unfamiliar. For months, my world had been a constant storm. Legal calls, interviews, courtrooms, headlines, whispered conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. Then suddenly, nothing. No reporters outside my apartment. No emergency board meetings. No anonymous threats. Just morning light slipping quietly through my blinds. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, it felt disorienting. Because when you spend years fighting to survive something, you don't immediately know who you are without the battle. My father's sentencing had reshaped everything. He wasn't imprisoned, but his empire was dismantled. Licenses revoked, board removal permanent, assets seized and restructured under external oversight. He became what he feared most, irrelevant. Clarissa filed for divorce within weeks. That surprised no one. Investors distanced themselves. Old friends vanished. The invitation stopped. Power is magnetic, and when it disappears, so does the crowd. I didn't celebrate, because revenge had never been my goal. Freedom was, and freedom feels quiet. The first real shift came unexpectedly. A call from Daniel. "The board wants to meet," he said carefully. "I'm not coming back," I replied instinctively. "You should at least hear them." I almost refused. But growth isn't running from the past. It's walking back into it differently. So I agreed. The conference room felt smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I felt larger, different, stronger. The remaining board members sat with unfamiliar humility. One of them cleared his throat. "We owe you an apology." The words hung awkwardly in the air. "For what?" I asked calmly. "For believing the narrative." I nodded. "Fear spreads faster than truth," I said. Another board member leaned forward. "We're restructuring the company. Full transparency protocols. Independent audits." "Good. That's what should have existed all along." "We want to offer you a position," he continued. "Chief Financial Compliance Officer. The irony nearly made me smile. The daughter, once labeled unstable, was now being asked to rebuild integrity. I didn't answer immediately, because this wasn't about validation. It was about alignment. "I have conditions," I said finally. They listened carefully. Full authority to implement independent oversight. Whistleblower protections written into policy. Public transparency reports. No more hidden corners. No more shadows. They agreed, unanimously. And just like that, I stepped back into the building, not as someone seeking approval, but as someone setting standards. Rebuilding wasn't glamorous. It was tedious. Audits, policy drafts, long meetings about accountability. But every signature I authorized felt different than the ones I'd once processed under silence. Because this time I wasn't protecting a lie. I was protecting the truth. And there's a profound difference. One afternoon, months later, I received a letter, handwritten, from my father. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't manipulative. It was sparse. "Luna, I have had more time to think than I ever allowed myself before. Power distorts perspective. I see that now. I don't expect forgiveness. I forfeited that. But I hope one day you understand that fear drove more of my decisions than pride did. Dad." He hadn't signed it with his full name. Just Dad. I didn't cry. I didn't feel rage. I felt something complicated. Understanding doesn't excuse harm, but it does release hatred. And I didn't want to carry hatred into my new life. So I wrote back, "I understand more than you think, but understanding doesn't erase accountability. I hope you find peace and honesty. I didn't promise reconciliation. Some bridges don't rebuild. They become lessons. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It came in quiet realizations. The first time I attended a social event and didn't scan the room for his approval. The first time I spoke publicly about corporate ethics and my voice didn't tremble. The first time I said, "I'm proud of myself," without guilt. That one surprised me the most, because pride had always felt dangerous, like arrogance, like something that would be punished. But pride rooted in integrity? That's different. That's earned. 6 months after the trial, I stood on a stage at a financial ethics conference. The irony wasn't lost on me. The daughter of a disgraced executive speaking about transparency. But life loves symmetry. When I stepped up to the microphone, I didn't see reporters. I saw faces, young professionals, students, leaders, people listening. "I was once told I was a mistake," I began. The room stilled. For a long time I believed it. I told them about silence, about fear disguised as loyalty, about how easy it is to protect someone you love, even when they are wrong. "But strength isn't protecting corruption," I said. "It's protecting your conscience." I saw people taking notes, leaning forward, and something inside me shifted permanently. My pain had purpose now. It wasn't just survival. It was guidance. The final piece of karmic justice came unexpectedly. A civil settlement redistribution. Funds recovered from hidden offshore accounts were legally required to be reallocated. Part of that allocation went toward employee pensions that had quietly suffered under financial manipulation. Another portion went toward a foundation, an ethics and accountability initiative, and the board asked me to name it. I didn't hesitate. The Courage Initiative. After my mother's final words. Because courage isn't loud. It's consistent. It's choosing truth when silence is safer. I visited my mother's grave on what would have been her birthday. The air was calm, the sky soft and gray. "I did it," I whispered, not in triumph. In completion, I told the truth. For years, I thought justice meant punishment, but justice is restoration. It's balance returning. It's integrity standing where fear once ruled. And standing there, I realized something profound. My father's greatest mistake wasn't calling me one. It was underestimating what resilience creates. The last time I saw him was by chance. A quiet cafe downtown. He looked older, simpler. There was no entourage, no sharp suit, just a man with coffee and time. He noticed me, hesitated, then nodded. I walked over, not as a daughter seeking approval, not as an enemy, just as myself. "How are you?" he asked. "Peaceful," I said honestly. He studied me. "You always were stronger than I gave you credit for." I almost smiled. "You taught me strategy," I replied. "Mom taught me integrity." He exhaled slowly. "I chose wrong." "Yes," I said gently, "but you don't have to keep choosing wrong." We didn't hug. We didn't reconcile dramatically. Some wounds don't close that way, but there was something new between us. Truth. And truth, even late, is lighter than illusion. On my next birthday, I didn't host a grand party. No spectacle, no performance, just a small dinner with people who valued honesty more than image. At one point, Daniel raised his glass. "To Luna," he said, "for proving that being underestimated is sometimes the greatest advantage." Everyone laughed softly. I felt warmth spread through my chest. Not validation, not revenge. Belonging, real belonging. And as I looked around the table, I understood the final lesson of it all. Strength isn't about destroying someone who hurt you. It's about refusing to become like them. Hope isn't naive. It's rebellious. Resilience isn't loud. It's persistent. And I was never a mistake. I was a mirror, a reckoning, a daughter who chose truth over comfort. And from the ashes of humiliation, intimidation, and betrayal, I built a life rooted in something stronger than power. Integrity. Because, in the end, he lost his empire. I found myself, and that was the only victory that ever mattered. There's a strange silence that follows survival, not the kind filled with loneliness, the kind filled with space. Space to breathe, space to rebuild, space to decide who you are when you are no longer fighting to prove you deserve to exist. For most of my life, I had defined myself in reaction to my father. I worked harder because he doubted me. I stayed quiet because he intimidated me. I endured because I wanted approval. But when the courtrooms emptied and the headlines faded, I realized something unsettling. If I wasn't fighting him anymore, who was I? The company stabilized within a year. New compliance systems, independent oversight committees, transparent reporting structures. It became something different than the empire he had built. Less flashy, more honest, and slowly trust returned. Not just externally, internally. Employees stopped whispering. Board meetings felt constructive instead of defensive. The culture changed. Integrity became currency. And sometimes, late at night, reviewing policy updates, I would pause and think, this is what it should have been all along. But success in business didn't automatically translate to emotional healing. Healing required stillness. So I did something I never allowed myself before. I took time off. No board calls. No press. No conferences. I rented a small coastal house for 3 weeks. Just me. A journal. The ocean. The first few days were restless. I kept checking my phone, waiting for crisis, waiting for accusation, waiting for someone to tell me I had done something wrong. No one did. The waves didn't judge. The wind didn't criticize. And slowly my nervous system softened. One morning, walking along the shoreline, I realized something simple but revolutionary. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him. Not of judgment. Not of abandonment. Because once you survive public humiliation, legal war, and emotional betrayal, what's left to fear? I started writing. Not for court. Not for evidence. For myself. Memories surfaced. The first time he dismissed my science fair project. The first time he called me too emotional. The night I overheard my parents arguing behind closed doors. I didn't write to blame. I wrote to understand. Patterns became clearer. My father wasn't born cruel. He was born insecure, raised in scarcity, obsessed with status, terrified of irrelevance. He built power like armor. And when anyone threatened that armor, even his own wife, even his own daughter, he attacked. Understanding that didn't excuse him, but it freed me from internalizing his behavior. His cruelty was about his fear, not my worth. That realization changed everything. When I returned to the city, something unexpected awaited me. An invitation to speak at a university. Topic: ethical leadership and personal integrity. Normally, I would have focused on policy, financial systems, corporate structures, but this time I said yes for a different reason. Because leadership isn't just about business, it's about identity. The auditorium was filled with students, young, ambitious, impressionable. I saw versions of myself in them, hungry to prove something, terrified of failing. I want to tell you a story, I began. Not about fraud, not about court, about a birthday party, about being called a mistake. You could hear the shift in the room. Silence, curiosity, recognition. For years, I told them, I tried to earn love by shrinking myself. Heads nodded. Then one day, I realized something important. If someone needs you small to feel powerful, they're not strong. The room exhaled. Integrity will cost you, I continued. It may cost relationships, comfort, reputation. I paused, but losing your integrity costs more. When the talk ended, students lined up to speak with me. One girl, barely 19, looked at me with tears in her eyes. My father says I'll never be good enough, she whispered. I took her hands. You don't need to be good enough for someone who benefits from you doubting yourself. She nodded like she had been waiting her entire life to hear that. And in that moment, I understood something bigger than revenge. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It was permission. A year after sentencing, the Courage Initiative officially launched. Scholarships, workshops, mentorship programs focused on ethical leadership. Young professionals trained in accountability frameworks. Whistleblower protection education. It wasn't flashy. It was foundational. At the launch event, I stood beside a plaque bearing my mother's name. Not my father's. Hers. The applause wasn't loud. It was sincere. And sincerity feels better than spectacle. Then came the moment I never expected. A second letter. From him. This one shorter. I attended one of your talks anonymously. You were compelling. You were right. No apology. No dramatic confession. Just acknowledgement. And strangely, that was enough. Because I no longer needed him to validate me. But seeing him recognize the truth meant something else. Growth isn't exclusive. Even those who fall can evolve. Months later, he requested to meet again. Public park. Neutral. We sat on a bench facing a quiet lake. I sold the house, he said. The house where he called me a mistake. I'm downsizing. He looked lighter. Not powerful. Not impressive. Human. I spent my whole life trying to be untouchable, he admitted. And I ended up alone. I didn't soften out of guilt. I listened. I thought fear created respect, he continued. It creates distance. Yes, I said quietly. He swallowed. You don't owe me anything. No, I agreed. But I choose not to hate you. That surprised him. Why? Because hate keeps me tied to the version of you that hurt me. Silence settled between us. Peaceful this time. We didn't rebuild a father-daughter fantasy. We built something smaller, honest, occasional coffee, measured conversations, boundaries, and sometimes boundaries are the healthiest form of love. On my 31st birthday, I hosted a gathering. Not grand, not strategic, just meaningful. Close friends, colleagues who valued transparency, mentors, students from the initiative. At one point, someone asked, if you could go back to that birthday party 3 years ago, what would you change? I thought about it carefully. I wouldn't change anything, I said, because humiliation was the catalyst. Pain was the ignition. Without it, I might still be silent, still shrinking, still protecting someone who harmed others. That party didn't break me. It revealed me. Later that night, after everyone left, I stood alone in my living room. No decorations, no spectacle, just quiet. I whispered the words, I once longed to hear from him. "You are not a mistake." And this time, I believed them, not because someone else said them, but because I proved them, over and over, through action, through courage, through truth. The final lesson didn't come from courtrooms or boardrooms. It came from a simple realization. You cannot control how someone defines you, but you can control whether you accept it. For years, I accepted his definition. Unplanned, burden, too emotional, too idealistic. And then one night, in front of 200 witnesses, I chose to reject it. That choice reshaped everything. Today, when people ask me what justice feels like, I tell them this. Justice isn't watching someone fall. It's standing tall without needing them to. Strength isn't never being wounded. It's refusing to let the wound define you. Hope isn't pretending pain didn't happen. It's deciding pain won't dictate the future. And resilience. Resilience is telling the truth when silence would be easier. My father once built an empire out of fear. I built a life out of integrity. He chased power. I chose purpose. He called me a mistake. I became his reckoning. But more importantly, I became myself. And that was never a mistake at all.